So this is a thing, this idea of recreation needing specific resources. And those specific resources are in real limited supply. Now, if you take a forest econ class or any micro or macroeconomics class, you have this sense of supply and demand. We've all heard that concept, right? Well, in forest and outdoor recreation, because there is this interesting and sort of complex blend between the resource orientation, the dependency on the resource. Like if you're rock climbing, you gotta have rock walls. If you are whitewater rafting, you need whitewater rafting places and rafts able to handle those hydraulics. And forest watershed management to make sure that there's enough, but not too many, cubic feet per second going through each of those hydraulics. The difference between a subclass 1 riffle, basically just a rough patch on the water, versus a 5+ hydraulic able to eat a house and keep on going, is just how many cubic feet per second of water are flowing by that spot and creating that standing hydraulic feature, that oscillation or that standing wave in the water. All right, so the thing that makes it interesting and responsive to your choices as the manager, highly responsive to your efforts on site and efforts in the office as the park ranger, are because it's not just resource oriented. It is also each one of these activities, each one of these subcultures, each one of these individual groups is also user oriented. They're not all coming for exactly the same thing in exactly the same way. So we're going to talk here a little bit later about ideas just in an introductory level, like specialization, where somebody picking up a king fishing pole for the first time is not the same person as a fly fisherman. Okay. They have different needs. They have different impacts and impact rates and timings and specific locations that they need to be successful. So that's cool. That's interesting. In forest wildlife management, it's en masse management. We are managing hundreds of thousands or millions of snow geese coming through our habitat area and making sure that it's all pretty well good to go. And we're basically treating all of those snow geese as one organism multiplied many times. We're kind of managing for the average or center of mass. But with human beings, because we are weird and particular and have things like egos and subcultures and meaningful individual differences, like all you nonconformists look the same, doesn't really apply in forest and outdoor rec management. That means we can try out a bunch of different stuff, and we have. So this is part of what we find when we start taking a real close look at the variety, the heterogeneity of the people that we are working with, coupled with the highly diverse, heterogeneous environments in which we're trying to work with those people. And that's pretty cool. So when we get all the way down to sort of the beating heart of the Venn diagram here, the settings and activities are going to be a real big list. One of the sins we can commit of applying other techniques and skills and mindsets of forestry resource management into forest recreation, kind of that en masse, it's a whole bunch of organisms that are all functionally identical. We can miss the fine texture of the settings and activities involved, okay? So, if you want to continue the snow geese example, the snow geese habitat required in the Great Mississippi Flyway is going to be some specific combination of open water and like silage covered or cover crop covered fields for those snow geese to sort of land in safely and maybe get shot at as they cross over Crab Orchard Wildlife Refuge and so forth. And that's a pretty coarse understanding of what that specific species needs. We have a category in this class for treating the human recreationist as another wildlife species with habitat needs and life cycle needs and so on and so forth. But we can't collapse it down into a single species. We gotta parse it out. We gotta split it out into every single setting times every single activity for that setting. So when you get out there with your newly minted ranger badge, you finish up your forestry degree or get a temp seasonal summer position while you're a forestry student doing field ranger kinds of activities, Maybe some of you guys and gals are applying for those right now at usajobs.gov and so forth, and all the different state organizations. You're going to parachute onto working onto that site and have to learn real fast what are all of the species present that I need to be aware of and managing for, and what are all the huge range of subspecies on the human side of things for this place. I'll give you another example. We have the Ozark National Scenic Riverways just a little bit west of us, and it's an awesome spot where you can go boating, kayaking, tubing, fishing, all kinds of stuff. Camping, horseback riding, if you want to stay on the dry side as well, and so forth. Other National Scenic Riverways where one of our recent alums, a guy named Dalton, has been working, the Snake River in Idaho, it's a little bit different. Same thing. There's rafting, boating, fishing, kayaking, horseback riding, all that stuff. And he mentioned that when he was working a boat launch on the Snake River, somebody had a particular aversion. This is in Idaho, right? A few people in Idaho have an aversion, a negative stress response to seeing the government, including recreation rangers. So Dalton was working at this particular boat launch and just rocked up on somebody asking, hey, how are you guys doing? Do you need anything today? Just checking in, making a visitor contact, right? Recreation rangers do this all day, all year long. No big deal. And somebody flashed their very large open carry firearm and was like, I don't want to talk with anybody from the government right now. That's a little bit different than all of the responses, and I've contacted lots and lots of people around Ozark National Scenic Riverways. It's a subcultural difference. Idaho versus southern Missouri. So we can't collapse together everybody and call them all snow geese. Human recreation's version of snow geese is the point I'm trying to make. Question?
I did not think you were going to say firearm when you were saying that. You're like,
Flasher? Yeah, well,
firearm.
Interesting story along that line. I have had armed ranger escorts, law enforcement rangers of the United States National Park Service, as escort when I had to map recreation impacts at a particular area that had been taken over by an online organized group of nudists and swingers. You know what? Like, live your life. Life is nasty, brutish, and short. If you want to let it all hang out and get sunburned in places that you didn't even know existed, fine, no big deal. But it got weird when other human beings with little kids wanted to use the same swimming hole. This is up in Maine, where it gets even cold in the summer. I don't know why you would want to have a swinging community up there. Maybe you thought nobody else would think of that. Whatever. And so it got to a point of not armed confrontation, but certainly some of the people were packing. And like the swingers were trying to chase off some of these families with little kids. It's like, no, this is our swimming hole. And it's like, no, it's really not. This is a national park. This is everybody's jam. And so it got to the point of like, okay, I'm a random researcher, cataloging on contract with the Park Service a whole bunch of recreation impacts, just like mapping muddy spots along trails and where people had created visitor-built campsites and stuff like that, which are illegal for a bunch of reasons. And I had to have somebody with a gun because naked people were getting aggressive, Like, that's the side of forestry we don't usually wake up and think about. Like, okay, let's go mark some timber, not deal with naked, angry people. Can you imagine like a running battle between naked people, just everything flopping around? That's horrible. Right? I'm still scarred, clearly. But those are the kinds of things that you don't necessarily take into account, but it makes a lot of sense when you start thinking about, okay, there's a ton of functional, meaningful diversity here. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. And I don't know if you know anything about the history of the United States federal government, but they've been super about one-size-fits-all solutions because they're dealing at huge scale, right? The Park Service is dealing with 300 million visitors a year. That's a lot. And you can't tailor or customize the experience to every single individual person. but neither can you just throw up your hands and say, all right, well, everybody's going to be a hiker on the Shawnee National Forest because we're going to treat everybody like a hiker. And if you want to ride a horse, sorry. Okay. So that keeps it interesting. And when you factor in how each of these subcultures is changing and evolving and growing in most cases, that makes it even more worthwhile to kind of split the stuff out and see if you can capture a bunch of smart solutions that satisfy this group here, and this group over here, even though these two groups don't really like each other. They don't even want to talk to each other or see each other in a lot of cases. Okay, there's this perceived competition for access to resources, but it doesn't have to be that way. So, what happens when things go really well? What happens when things go really wrong? We can think about this as kind of a, not so much Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you're familiar with that. Like, we need air and water and shelter, and at the top we have this need for self-actualization, but you're not really worried about self-actualization, living your best life, fulfilling your dreams, if you can't breathe. You know, there's this hierarchy of needs, or a dependent chain of needs. At the bottom end of the hierarchy for recreation management, we can kind of grade ourselves informally on how we're doing as rangers and as fisheries managers and as facility construction folks like trail crews and so forth, by looking at the outcomes of people's recreation trips onto a place like Shawnee National Forest, run by the Forest Service, or Ozark Scenic Riverways, run by the National Park Service. Ask yourselves, are we spending all of our time dealing with crime and delinquency? Is this a national forest covered in meth labs? Like, that's a non-trivial question for the Shawnee. There are lots of meth labs built on the Shawnee to, you know, cook that rock or whatever. And if we're not seeing a bunch of crime and delinquency, people doing things like showing up to camp and sawing down trees in their campsite because they're bored, we would call that the delinquency side of it, well, then maybe we're doing something right, because we're providing better, more constructive, more sustainable options. So we see this in a lot of news stories where somebody at some place, at Goblin Valley State Park, people pushing over rock chimneys called hoodoos and toppling boulders onto steep trails that then roll down Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom style down onto other hikers, and you know, kind of high-fiving each other like, oh, we're making these trails safer. It's like, no, you're an idiot. Or we have a bunch of examples. We'll see a bunch of video examples of these later in the semester. Moving on from crime and delinquency, usually that's not a huge problem at parks, right? The murder rate across the entire national park system of over 400 units and 300 million visits a year is about exactly the same as the murder rate in Carbondale. So you are equally likely to die spending 300 million of your days per year as one of your years in Carbondale. All right, statistics are a little bit weird. Death rates are a little bit weird to think about, but the math is actually bizarrely close by. So that's a thing. Up from crime and delinquency, our next would be sort of a low-quality obsession, where somebody is... We don't see a lot of these folks because a low-quality obsession would be something like somebody who watches... what are any of the shows on like OLN or something like that deal with like outdoor life, where hunting is somebody's lifestyle, not just something they do every once in a while?
Could Survivor be one?
Survivor could be one, okay? Survivor Man with Les Stroud, a slightly higher quality show than like Bear Grylls drinking his urine, and like climbing up goofy little cliffs with forced camera angles right next to a highway, but it says he's way off in the... Anyway, don't get me started on Bear Grylls. Low quality obsession. Like, this is somebody who's identifying with that life, but not really ever getting out and doing that life. They're passively consuming somebody else, sort of feeding them that lifestyle through YouTube or Twitch. Somebody has a ton of Twitch subscriptions but never really plays games. then that might be a low quality obsession. And it might be a healthy, okay thing too. We're not going to stereotype, we're not going to apply these labels sort of clumsily across everybody. But it can be this. Like somebody who watches a bunch of TV shows about hiking and never goes out on a hike, maybe they've missed out on something. Maybe. It could be perfectly healthy. Up above that, we have amusement, which is sort of a low quality thing, low engagement thing, low energy, low investment style. Like a lot of YouTube videos that just barely low-key entertain you. Like there's a whole bunch of press channels where they'll put anything under like a heavy press and just see how much weight it can take before it just blows up or explodes, or will it blend, or let's chop everything with swords kind of YouTube channels. And like there's nothing wrong with this, but it's not constructive. You're not really learning anything. You're not really developing anything in yourself. It's just amusement. We would consider this, given the option of having people out backpacking and horseback riding and so on and so forth, if this is all that people choose, or especially all that people feel that they can choose, huge problem. Okay. From there, emotional participation. This is somebody who really does genuinely, in a positive way, get into the community, the scene, the vibe. This would be somebody who goes to a bunch of sort of official or unsanctioned drag races as a spectator, but not as a participant. They're getting out there. They're experiencing a subculture. They're making a lot of connections. They are learning things within the space of that particular subculture. So this is somebody who, maybe can't afford to keep horses, but goes to like cross-country competitions or barrel racing competitions or horse shows. Like the Illinois State Horse Fair is an awesome event each year. And to go to that, you don't have to be a horse owner. You just sort of be into it. So we consider that a positive thing. That's good, right? There is getting out there. There is doing. There is connection there. And then, of course, above that, active participation. So actually being out there. This is a video from one of our hikes on summer camp. This is in part of the Grand Canyon. It's a beautiful, beautiful spot. This is Yosemite and so forth. Okay? It's getting out there and doing the thing. So this is one of the largest organisms in the world, the General Sherman tree. And if you look real close, you can see people in that tree. That's how big it is. They're like a couple of pixels each. That's a big tree. And there is no way to fully experience the size of that organism without going to see it. Like, it's not the same. It's not the same. We would call this low quality participation with that form of forced and outdoor recreation, tree climbing. And then even above active participation, you see that rare person or group of people that takes some new technological development and brings it into something like tree climbing, using rock climbing equipment and adapting it for safe and effective and sustainable tree use. You can't hammer a bunch of pitons into trees to climb them to block protection in. Pitons are just metal spikes, metal spikes that are long hook nails that you attach traditional climbing personal protective equipment onto. Instead, we get all kinds of other stuff. Air guns. People adapted air guns and potato guns to launch weighted bags with leader line on them to get rock climbing and rope climbing and tree climbing protection ropes up into trees so that you can safely climb up and do tree work professionally or just have fun climbing trees. So there's this sense of the evolution happens usually at one of two extremes of this hierarchy of participation engagement. Positively at the creativity end, using carbon fiber to do stuff with equipment-heavy forms of recreation in a lighter, longer range kind of a way. If you're spending less battery or gas pushing your vehicle because it's made out of carbon fiber composites, you can get further out into beautiful natural places, for example. And then we also see some unfortunate creativity in this. Maybe it's not real creative to be a meth head and stripping park facilities of their copper wiring, but it is at least a novel use of that environment. So technically, we have to include that as a new way to use the space. Does this make sense? All right. So think about the last time you experienced the Shawnee National Forest or any IDNR state sites. Little Grand Canyon around here. Has anybody been to Little Grand Canyon before? Good. All right. Awesome. Think about the kinds of behaviors you saw when you were on site there, or anybody you did not see. That's probably a pretty big number of people if you think about it. Okay. Did you see a bunch of crime and delinquency? People carving their initials into the soft rock around here? Or were people out there doing the thing in a positive, constructive, sustainable way? Which is pretty high on our list here. Did you see anybody innovating? It's a little bit hard to spot those often. But when you go to a gear shop like Shawnee Trails or Dick's Sporting Goods or something like that, and you see a kind of equipment or style of clothing for outdoor recreation use that you've never seen before, that's another expression of that sort of creative, top-out, new kind of way of doing things. Can you think of any of these examples as a way of grading how forest rec management is going on the Shawnee or at Little Grand Canyon or anything like that? Have you seen any impacts? Have you seen any active participation or creativity? Anybody? How about it? Pro tip. If you've ever seen anyone at any of these places, that's probably active participation. So the answer is yes, we have. But where have you mostly seen this stuff? Have you seen a whole bunch of evidence of graffiti or people digging up? In a lot of campgrounds, you have to sink a concrete anchor and a heavy chain around picnic tables and stuff like that because people steal those. Like, that is extra. That's a lot of work to dig one of those up and steal them. Anyway, all right. So if you think about somebody doing something new for the first time, like the first summit of Everest, first summit of Kilimanjaro way back in the day, first summit much more recently of any of the peaks in Antarctica. There's a degree of creativity, of evolutionary or revolutionary jumps in what humans are capable of in order to even think about, I want to be the first person to climb such and such mountain on the largely unexplored continent of Antarctica. Like, there have been a few people that have navigated from one side of Antarctica to the other. Very few of them on foot even, solo, unsupported, or self-supported treks. Like, that's pretty nuts. And it's only been recently possible for that in the first place. So, we see new ways of adapting technologies like high-tension nylon belts. This is basically seatbelt material. It's just a very thick cargo strap version of a seatbelt. And now we can go, this is not tightrope walking, this is called slacklining. Tightrope walking has been a thing for, I don't know, 100, 150 years in circuses and stuff like that. And this, if you guys ask me very nicely, I can dig up a video of Dr. Akimani slacklining for the first time in his life a couple years ago on summer camp. It was awesome. But somebody had to think this was a good idea. And then somebody had to exercise the creativity, the ingenuity, to figure out how to get it done. And then somebody had to actively participate enough to practice up to a skill level required for this kind of participation. This is a new way of using this space. It's, if you want to think about it, a more efficient way of using this space because everybody else backpacking near here, they're not in that air gap, in that chasm right there. So we can pack people more densely as long as nobody's directly over that. So in case there's an accident, We don't have 2 people killed instead of 1. Okay? So, from this, you can kind of take a step back and go, all right, so definitely there's a case for developing new things. It's way beyond amusement without real personal value. It's that low grade, sort of failing grade that we would give ourselves if we saw people just amusing themselves on a national forest. We would consider low grade amusement on a national forest to be something like a recent trend. One example would be gender reveal parties. Like, it's not really creative. It's not really active participation. It's just a bunch of people watching a YouTube video of a few people blowing up explosives in public places and then setting forest fires. For not much of a good reason, right? Like a 10-second long YouTube video or 10-minute long party surprise gender reveal, we have a lot of resource impacts that go way far into the future. Okay, so we would consider that pretty destructive or delinquent. All right, this is a pretty big deal. So, forest recreation is not mild entertainment. Things like World Wrestling Entertainment doesn't really have a space in national forests and national parks because we are called to something different, to provide something different than just free time, just entertainment, just sports that we can do anywhere else in a regulated sports arena kind of environment. Okay? So using resources in a way that the resource gets degraded by, and or people getting injured by, is not the thing. It's a good thing he stopped his fall with his cranium. Okay. It is also not stuff like Disney, right? We have the Hospitality and Tourism Administration major for that. This is a completely synthetic environment. Completely. And the most impressive ones look pretty natural in some ways. There are a lot of resorts. Japan has a whole bunch of volcanic, geothermal fed hot springs and stuff like that. They build resorts called onsen, and you just go and soak in the water, and there's this mountain stream running by and stuff like that. But it's still a completely regulated, constructed environment. And neither is it paying somebody to take you on a trip into a wild or natural place. That is adventure tourism. We're not managing this in forest rec management. We are looking to see people out there mostly under their own steam instead of a couple of companies getting really rich off of exploiting the natural resources of Shawnee or Hawaiian sea caves or whatever. Obviously it's not sports because this isn't really adding much to society. Some of us would argue. All right. And we got to be careful. Some things that are sports in our national forest, this is a rally style race. This is not forest and outdoor recreation either, right? Driving at 110, 120 miles an hour on gravel roads with very, very, very highly trained people and extremely specialized equipment. One of my research buddies does rally car racing with his brother. They converted their Subaru, over to do stuff like this and won a bunch of money in the X Games, if you've heard of that. But they're very clear that that's a sport that happens to use national forests because national forests and the Bureau of Land Management are the only agencies crazy enough to countenance stuff like this. This is awesome until something goes wrong, and then everything is wrong, like rapid unscheduled disassembly of the vehicle and the occupants, or vehicle colliding with onlookers like these. That's a thing. So forest and outdoor recreation management, it's got to be more than just doing interesting things in natural places. This isn't forest and outdoor recreation, right? This is just what? A true Vulcan cannon is what, like $1 million a minute to fire? I mean, 50 cal rotary barrel systems are awesome, but that's not what our forests are really for. Just happens to need an open space, not specifically things managed for recreation. So it's resource dependent. We're going to get out another resource and, to an extent, be at the mercy of those resources. And that can be a good thing, right? The sense of this not being fully controlled or regulated. Like, we can't ever cancel the weather as park and wildlife managers, even though the weather is one of the most influential factors of somebody saying, oh, this is a really good trip. I had a blast. The weather was perfect. Well, we got really lucky that time. Other times, the weather's a little bit harder, and it takes a little bit of extra skill or preparation or equipment or some combination of all of those to be out and safe and doing the thing. Okay? So, that means we are managing very risky, very dangerous environments paired with some fairly risky, dangerous activities. And we don't back down from that, because this is considered a really, really high value way to use these places. We're not doing much farming here. We're not doing much industry and manufacturing on a cliff face like this. But we are developing human beings very rapidly, in the sense of skilling up, building self-efficacy, self-confidence, some of those things we talked about earlier in this definition section. So, quick activity for us here. Pull out a sheet of paper, throw your name on it. This is going to be a one-question self-assessment. I'm carefully avoiding the word quiz. But check your understanding of what forest rec is and is not. If you are a forest ranger, are you managing for this activity right here? We'll just let this video repeat. Is this forest and outdoor rec? Or is it anything else we've talked about? Simple yes or no question. Don't give it away. Don't give it away. Question.
The question is this rec or is it management?
Is it forest and outdoor rec? Is this activity that you see? And then the inferred extension is, if it is forest and outdoor rec, then are we managing for this? But that's not our question. Just yes or no, is this forest rec? According to how we've been talking about it. This is intentionally a slightly not straightforward question. So let me know what you think. "10 seconds of Instagram glory, a lifetime of back pain. Diffuse cranial injury, it'll get you." All right. On Reddit, there's a subreddit called Noisy GIFs. This sounds like a noisy GIF to me, even though we've stripped the audio out of it. Yeah. All right, everybody got this one? Yes or no? Okay. How about this one? This is from a TV show. They are mudding. This is overlanding or adventure racing of the motorized kind. You can see the regret enter the guy on the left. Like, you can see the actual frame when it happens, like, I'm fine, oh, reconsidering my life, like, whole life. Is this forest rec? By extension, are we on the hook? Do we want to be? Are we aspirationally managing towards providing this in a good, sustainable way? Yes or no? That's a pretty funny TV show if any of you guys have ever seen it, but yeah. Okay, everybody good? Yes or no on that one? All right, cool. How about this one? This is at the Grand Canyon, just west of Navajo Point. to kind of spoiler alert it, this guy later slips and slides quite a bit down the cliff face. I don't know what the specific term for a mohawk mullet is, but this is it. Okay, everybody good on this one? All right. Let's see. Do just a couple of more. This next one is slightly different. Which of these two, that's a manatee or dugong on the left, the person is in a clear acrylic hull kayak, a so-called glass bottom boat, and the person on the right is on a whale watching ship. Which of these two will we consider outdoor rec? Not forest rec, obviously, but outdoor rec versus anything else. Sport, tourism, low-grade entertainment, whatever it might look like, but not actually be outdoor rec. Which is which? You guys ever been on a whale watch? It's a pretty cool experience, right? Yeah, okay. All right, second to last one. This one here. Is this forest and outdoor rec? Are we to be managing for this? Somebody's added an inboard prop engine to an ATV and put an airfoil on top. Wait for it. Wait for it. Man, these videos are so much better when you know how it turned out one way or the other. Like, haha, funny. Comedy is someone else's tragedy. A lot of people each year around the world are killed by parasailing in stormy conditions and flying into cliff faces or getting dragged underwater or flying into buildings at high speed. Yeah, so the lift is by adding more thrust, you vector upward and you are sort of wedging your way up into the sky. So if you cut throttle, you swing back down and slow down, and hopefully it's a controlled landing. This doesn't really have a lot of control surfaces, so it's fairly imprecise. But if you have a wide open, very flat, very soft surface, this can be a lot of fun and about as safe as you're going to make it. It is never going to be safe, but yeah. All right, everybody got this one? Yes or no? Okay. Last one. Is this forest an outdoor rec? It's at least an influencer, but is it forest and outdoor rec? And we to be managing toward this. Alright, everybody got all your answers? Cool. Let's cycle back real fast. Just show of hands for each of these. We got about 2 minutes left. Show of hands for number one. This is forest and outdoor rec. We should be managing for something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, not half of them. Okay, definitely not managing towards this specific. Okay. Because. And we're gonna run out of trees pretty fast doing this, right? We need a very specific size and shape of tree to be able to do this kind of a thing. So yeah, we can manage towards this, understanding that somebody's gonna try it, but can we keep it up long term? If not, then we need to modify it somehow or cut it out. All right, next, show of hands, forest and outdoor rec. Okay, 2. Very good. How about this one? Forest and outdoor rec. Yeah, it is. It's a pretty horrible example, but yeah, this is. Huh? It's not sport. It's not tourism. It is not legal. But it is forest and outdoor rec. So this is where we want to go hard on managing. We know some tiny proportion of the population wants to do this. We need to engage with that and not put our heads in the sand. Good question. All right. Which is outdoor rec? Which is tourism? Nature-based tourism in this case. Left side of it. Okay. All right. Microsoft Outlook. Why are you installing right now? Whatever. All right. Let's see. Forest and outdoor rec. Generally, this would not be considered one, right? This is something we could do in a forested or more likely prairie environment, but this has nothing to do with the resource. This is purely highly creative, I think. I mean, it takes a lot of technical skill to even figure this out, but doesn't need a forest to do it. All right, how about this one? Forest and outdoor rec to manage? We're almost done. Yeah. Agreed. Okay, this is another one of those. Somebody's going to try this. We need to be ready for that. Cool. Let's end it right there. Go ahead and put your name on this. This is not a graded quiz. This is more a participatory discussion, but I'll give you credit for that. Pile it up on front here. We'll see you on Thursday.